Hi everyone, I'm Phil Bliss, founder of Edge Computing Association, and welcome to the Founders Podcast, where we interview founders of edge computing organizations. Today, I'd like to introduce you to Anthony Pellegrino, founder of Mutable.io. Anthony, thanks very much, and let's get into the conversation. Okay, so welcome. To give you your real name, your street name, which is Pele, an online name. So Pele, just give us that story that we were just going through about why you're not Antoni or Antonio, Tony, why you're Pele, kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. So essentially, as I was explaining, I grew up in a world where I have the same name as my father. I'm actually the third, technically. And in that world, I grew up on Long Island, and it's a very Italian-Irish area. And literally in the same exact class in middle school, there was Anthony Magro, Anthony Passerette, Anthony Pellegrino, and Anthony Poto sit in alphabetical order right next to each other, right? And so everyone went by our last names, and essentially got shortened. And then through the power of gaming and all that fun stuff, I took more ownership of it as, okay. I was always the odd man out since I have the same name as my dad.
So, it's a great story. It's a great story. But tell us, being a little bit away from the personal side, tell us a bit about Pele, the business person, the founder, how you got here, why Mutable versus something else, kind of thing.
Yeah, I grew up in a very entrepreneurial, family and growing up. My dad owned a restaurant and 2 catering halls. My uncle co-owned it with him and did a TV studio. So we were born in a bread of workaholics, right? It's just who we were. And so I saw my dad the most when I was actually working with him. So from 5, I was making meatballs in the back, all the way up to, doing a lot of the catering and IT work, running their servers, doing the wireless, right? And this is all back when I was 15. And essentially that mentality kept going. And as I saw something that needed to be, optimized or fixed, I felt like I needed to do it. And during this process of doing streaming for gaming and robotics and IoT things, I realized that I don't want to be the person just making the things. I want to be able to help the people that are trying to make these things easier to do, because the more easier you can make the process and the infrastructure, the more that developers can actually take their ideas and make them a reality. And I wanted to help speed that along so more of these ideas can be, turned into reality.
So let's just give everyone an idea of what Mutable's product / value proposition is.
Sure.
Where it exists within the edge infrastructure, if you like.
Yeah, so it's a little different than the typical thought pattern. What we're doing is Airbnb for servers. So let me break that down a little bit. We're essentially working with cable companies, telcos, enterprises that have all these servers, just like Amazon did. When they have sales or the big days, 3 days out of the whole year, but most of the days that computer's just sitting there doing nothing and sitting idle. That they create this cloud that people can use in order to take advantage of it, right? We're doing the same thing, but basically collecting all of these independent resources that are actually much closer to the end user to create this public edge cloud. So if a developer wants to take an application and deploy it, within milliseconds of their end users, it's possible. They don't have to physically have their own servers everywhere to do that.
And I mean, how do they access this though? I mean, what's the process?
Yeah, so it's think of it kind of like an ad network. In an ad network where you have to specify like gender and age range and bulb and interests that they have, and then you display an ad on demand based off of that profile. Well, we're kind of doing that with compute, right? We're saying tell us what your CPU requirements are, memory requirements, your GPU requirements, and your latency requirements, and then we will automatically provision this compute on demand when it's needed, when a network request comes in. So that means you could technically be everywhere all the time, but in reality, you don't have to bear the expense of it. And basically have an experience just like you would on AWS.
Yeah. But is there an app, or how do people access it?
Yeah, so it's just like you would on any typical cloud provider. You essentially go on a website, use CLI tools, and be able to just on-demand pay for whatever resources that you use per second.
Well, you know, with your gaming background and things like, why did you end up here?
Well, if you think about it, right, being a gamer, doing streaming for gaming, doing robotics, all these type of things, you realize a few parts, right? So for gaming, in order to have a great experience, one, you have to have a really good network connection that doesn't jitter on you or anything like that. And two, you have to have an expensive computer to have a really good experience. So, in my world, same thing with robotics. If you wanted to have a great robot, right, you have to buy a whole bunch of expensive equipment. If you're doing IoT things like wireless charging for cars, you have to put computers inside of all these devices. Well, what if we could take those devices, and instead of them being literally paying for them up front, even though you're not using them all the time, you actually can just run them on a cloud that's down the street and run it there, and essentially be able to just pay for when you need it, right? Just like any other subscription model. So it really creates a whole new world of what kind of things that a person is able to get access to, like VR, right, and augmented reality, those type of things. If we aren't spending $1,200 on a phone or spending $2,500 on a gaming machine, you can literally just pay a couple bucks, just like you're watching a movie, to play a game wherever it is.
Okay. Well, you gave us a little bit about your background, but I mean, that's sort of you. I mean, you've now sort of bumped into lots of founders, lots of people who have started their own businesses. Are founders wired differently? I mean, I'm just curious. I'm just trying to build a profile of, why are they a founder? Why are they an entrepreneur? Why do they dive in and take the risk and start something? Is there some something unique about them?
Well, so once again, I did have a entrepreneurial background in terms of family, right? I started my first company when I was 16 under my dad's social security number. I have the same name as me. I have the same name as him. So like I was selling pens when I was, in elementary school and middle school, right? Like there was always something that I felt, if there was a need that, need to be, addressed, that screw it, I could do it myself, right? So are they wired differently? To some degree, I think it's a lot about motivation, right? So my motivation is more about how do I help and make a situation better for others than it is for me to become, the biggest thing in the world, right? I think that by proxy, I can be, this company can succeed very largely. But my mentality isn't about, I'm egotistic and I need to, constantly be number one in, the world or whatever it is, and just focus on getting the most money. My goal is, how do I help the people around me, and how do I help everything that I see so I can improve it? And in that regard, it basically just, creates this environment that is great for trying to build a team. I think being an entrepreneur is actually usually a curse. There's a lot of pain and stress, and you have to grind for a very long time. And if you're not persistent and passionate, it's not going to be something that you can really just pull off. And that's why when people say, I want people to sign an NDA because I have an idea. No, because you can share your idea to 1,000 or 1,000,000 people. If they don't have the same passion as you, it will never happen.
Yeah. So are you at the point of educating the market, or have you arrived just at the right time? I'm just curious to see where you think, you are in the sort of, this generation of edge, if you like.
Yeah, so we were definitely early. We were completely early. Remember, we were doing this for a number of years before. But now is the time of the tipping point where The education it's less about just hype and exciting people and more about practical reality and people gaining value. And so that shift is happening right now. And that's a big difference than, the past, 4 years or whatever it is. We've been thinking about this.
So, you said you just got funding coming in and stuff like that. What are you most excited about in the business these days?
So the biggest thing is to be able to convert what we've been trying to work on into reality and grow it. Like, the more that we can actually give developers access to this kind of resources and build these cool things, the more it not just validates what we're doing, but creates a whole new world to do all these awesome things like cloud gaming, like, autonomous vehicles like drones, all the next generation stuff. But even making the internet faster for today is really something we've been trying to push for a while, but not having the access and the drive from traction has been difficult. But now that we're getting access to compute all over the world, we'll be able to deliver on that.
I mean, what do you see as the future of Edge IoT? I mean, is it going to kind of totally change the way people, people have changed now. I mean, we have a distributed workforce, so that's one thing. But I mean, is there any gems that in terms of vision that you can see in terms of Edge IoT and how it will change not just the way we work, but the way we communicate, all kinds of things? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So, like, think of it this way. We've been in a world where every device acts on its own, right? It had its individual own computer. It just did simple tasks. The only thing that was connecting it was really your phone, directly next to it. And we're becoming in a world where literally everything can talk to each other. And that's a huge difference, right? We're talking not just communication, but just how you even walk around in the streets or in your house, right? You can walk in and say, "Hey, Alexa, turn your lights on," right? And like, that's something that's going to evolve over time. So essentially all these devices can be smart while still being cheap and be able to interact in a way that, we've been seeing on, movies and shows for the past, 30 years, like Minority Report and all that kind of stuff. And it's one of those things where we originally were just, for the past 20 years, just like, oh, that's, so far away and so on and so forth. But now it's becoming a possibility, within a very short amount of time. And it's one of those big things, just like mobile devices with 4G. The way that accelerated the gig economy in creating things like Uber and everything else, which really transformed, transportation.
Really did.
This is about to happen again. And we could say 5G and stuff like that, but really what it's about the automation and the software-defined networking and everything infrastructure that is changing this world around to actually usher in the next app store that's going to give in to all the things that we've been talking about for a while.
Well, where do you see Mutable in the next 5 years? I mean, are you going to be the kind of the next AWS or what do you think? Yeah, no,
I think exactly that, right? Think of what Airbnb does against hotels, right? Think of Amazon and AWS and Azure and Google as hotels, right? And they have their staples in every major city, and people totally go to them. But Airbnb creates this whole world where, a small town in the middle of nowhere, a person can make money and be able to give someone a great experience, all the way out in the middle of nowhere, right? And so if we can do that for compute, where all this compute in all these places that are underserved become a reality, even in Africa and everything else, we can really transform, the power of compute. And instead of the computer being a device, we see the network turning into one big computer.
Okay, it's interesting. What do you see as a fad right now in this sector?
So there's a lot of people claiming to be edge, right? I think edge is a very broad term. You have things that are on device that have been rebranded to edge. You have things that are on premise that have been rebranded to edge.
Mm-hmm.
In our mind, the edge is more or less where the network edge, where basically the network meets the connectivity to the end user. And that's our own definition and many others. And the reason behind it is we want to try and reduce the upfront cost of any individual. We don't think that any individual should have any additional cost to have devices in their home, in their office, in their workplace, on public streets. All that should be consolidated into these mini data centers, more or less, that are popping up. And a lot of these cable and telco companies already have these servers there, and it's just unlocking them for everyone else to exist. So that's, I think, the biggest thing.
Okay, let's move to Pele. What are the top 3 things on your bucket list right now?
So
but they don't just have to be business. They're
sure. Sure. So the biggest thing is it's also an entrepreneurial thing, that your life is your business, right? They come very intertwined. So for me, it's we're in the constant mode of hiring. We're in a constant mode of getting access to more servers and more compute, so we can give developers access to things that they never were able to before. It's providing a better quality of service for customers of cable companies and telcos who, if you ever, talk to a developer, or even, I'm sure you yourself, you could, you think of cable and telco companies as the devil. They're always trying to pull money out of you. They're always, trying to do these schemes. They have terrible service, but in reality, these guys are, especially cable companies, are family guys. They really want to help and do better. They're just behind in technology. So if we can give that boost and give that next layer of technology of what they need, we believe that we can really, change the paradigm of how we view them, and, give a better quality of service to everyone.
Okay. What's the greatest challenge you faced in business today?
The greatest challenge, especially as we're dealing with these industries, is it's a huge culture change, right? We're going from people who buy these servers, put them in, and essentially they're what we call tree huggers, right? They want to hoard the resources for themselves because they never know when they're going to get access to it again, right? So we know that for them it takes 18 months to put any new servers out there to run them stuff. So they plan way ahead and make sure that there's a huge buffer of all this extra stuff just in case something bad happens. And for us, we see that as one of the biggest detriments to everyone else, because that cost is passed along, and it's literally just wasted idle, what we call server rot, right? They sit there, and after 4 years they have to buy new things anyway, right? So if we can take them and transform it, those are the things that are really trying to move the needle on.
Okay. When you meet unexpected challenges, how do you handle them? I mean, you've had a lot of practice. You've been working in businesses that you've owned or your family's owned forever, and you hit those challenges. How do you overcome them?
So, for example, the challenge of working with cable companies and their culture and everything else, and throughout my whole thing of being always early, it's about patience. Patience is one of the biggest virtues for any entrepreneur. Because when you build something, you might see it coming because you're so domain specific and understand the problem, but it doesn't mean everyone else is ready for it, even if it's the right solution. Right? It's the whole idea of if any customer wanted, better transportation, they just wanted a faster horse, right? Versus getting a car, right? And that's the mentality, that sometimes you have to go through. And so you have to be preaching for a while in order for big shifts to change. In order to catch the wave. So you have to be persistent, stay lean, don't try and, go for the gusto right off the beginning. You have to get the timing right. Otherwise, the company's dead before it starts.
So think of somebody, 8 to 10 years younger than you, what advice would you give that person that maybe you didn't have then, basically?
one thing that I've realized over time, especially being an engineer at heart, is communication is incredibly important. So for example, as an engineer, if there's anything that's wrong, like let's say you're going to do something, you'll end up not talking to the person that you owe it to until you completed it, because in your mind, you don't want the confrontation of not, going to them with an uncompleted thing. So you will literally not answer their requests, email or phone calls or whatever it may be, for days or weeks at a time, because you're afraid of their response. And in some cases, these are the type of things that actually all you had to do was say, hey, look, I'm still working on this. Let me know, if there's any changes in what's going on, let me know. Because in a lot of cases, when you're an engineer building something, or you're running a project, or any of those type of things, communication is really important, because they have to relay that to others. They don't care if something goes, they know things can go to crap or it takes longer than it should. But without that communication layer, essentially you build distrust, and it creates a very toxic atmosphere. So just remember, whenever you're dealing with any other person on doing a task or promising something or whatever, the best thing you can do, especially if you're not done yet or not whatever, is just constantly communicate, and don't assume everything. Ask questions. Some cases, if you can just say, hey, look, do you really need this now? Can we wait another month? It can really make a big difference, both for you and for that other person that you're working with.
So what's the best piece of advice you've ever received? Think about it.
I don't know, but pretty good advice that I did hear is that getting to your goal is not getting to your goal is not a straight line, right? As long as you constantly move in that direction and you create those dots, eventually you can get to that goal, right? And that goal might change, but it's always in that direction. So don't try and make one big step to try and get there. It's always about just moving the needle a little bit more each way, and then those small steps will eventually get you to where you want to be. And always thinking about as one big step is where it becomes too much pressure for you to actually get anything ever done.
Okay, I'm just going to do some rapid fire questions.
Sure.
Just give me some fast answers. If you weren't doing what you're doing now, what would you be doing instead?
Well, it would take a lot to get me to not do what I'm doing, but I would probably be doing a lot with robotics. Robotics is a passion of mine that I had. Being able to mix software with hardware, and create new things out of it, has always been a passion of mine.
Yeah, it's kind of the extension from the game side of it, I think.
Yeah. It's I started building robots when I was 14, right? So that's always been a thing.
What book are you currently reading, listening to?
My best friend actually has been Google News, because Google, what ends up happening is the more that you search things, it is very good at knowing exactly what you've been to or what you looked at, and constantly tailors to find more things relevant. So for me, as I look at things for gaming and 5G and edge computing and, quantum computing and all these things, it starts constantly bringing up new things that, I wouldn't have found myself. Yeah. So that has been my guiding light for sure.
Okay. Are you a morning or a night person?
I was very much a night person, and I kind of still am, but my wife's a baker, and she's been getting up at 4:30 in the morning or whatever. So I had to shift a little bit. And my team is mainly in Europe, and I'm in New York, so that time difference is better off in the morning too. So yeah. My time has been shifting for a bit.
If you had to pick one word to describe yourself, Pelly, what would it be and why?
I would focus on persistent, right? Having patience and being persistent having that kind of quality is the type of thing that allowed me to gather all this information all the time and be able to apply it when it was the right time to do it, versus, at the, for example, building this whole thing with edge computing is taking a long time. My journey from game streaming to here has been, I don't know, 6 years, right? And being able to, take all this information as I go through all the different, stages and applying it to create what we're doing now is really the origin, more or less, of how it was thought up.
Yeah, no, it's 5 years is the minimum for an overnight success, I always think.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's keeping you up at night these days?
So it's mainly striking the balance of, having something to deliver to customers, while still focusing on, making it a long-term thing, right? So it's like the idea of technical debt, right? What do you make right now for what is needed today, as a shortcut, versus focusing on the long term, and building something that is meant to last, right? And that balance is always really key to make sure that you're not, digging a hole for yourself while, still providing value.
Okay. And the last one's a little bit more recreational. What's your most favorite place in the world?
In terms of food, it is New York. We got pizza, bagels, Chinese food, all these things that, as much as they are from other cultures, they're really New York, right? Like, whole new category.
You got to come up to Toronto and try it. Food's great here. But
I'm sure. I totally would love to. So.
That's great. That's tremendous, Pelly. It's been a good session. Thank you. It's really some really good observations you're making there for everybody. It's going to be, I think, a good listen for people. And I was like, people listen. They want to connect. What's the best place to get a hold of you?
You can hit me up on Twitter. It's Pelly3, or actually just go to Mutable on Twitter, or even Pelly at mutable.io. We're happy to constantly mentor, help out, and give advice, because this is it's a hard road to be on, and you need all the emotional support you can get.
Well, listen, thank you very much for coming on to the Founders Podcast. Really appreciate it, Pelly. It's been great chatting with you.
Pleasure. Thanks.